Picture this. You're cruising through some of the world's most contested waters, minding your own business, when suddenly your radar lights up like a Christmas tree. That's exactly what happened to the crew of the USS Princeton on June 14, 2025 at 9:23 in the morning. What started as just another routine patrol in the South China Sea was about to become a masterclass in why challenging the United States Navy remains one of the dumbest ideas in modern warfare.
The Princeton was doing what American warships have done for over 7 decades, keeping the world's most critical shipping lanes open for business. We're talking about waters where $3.4 trillion worth of goods flow every single year. That's trillion with a T, folks. Everything from the smartphone in your pocket to the car in your driveway probably floated through these exact waters at some point. But on this particular morning, something was different. The Princeton's advanced SPY radar, and I'm talking about technology so sophisticated it can spot a baseball at 165 miles, suddenly painted a contact that made everyone in the Combat Information Center sit up a little straighter. A Chinese Type 052D destroyer, call sign Zhangcheng, had been hanging around about 200 kilometers away, just kind of loitering like that one guy at every party who doesn't know when to leave. Then, in the span of 90 seconds, this Chinese warship did something that would have made any seasoned naval officer's blood run cold. She accelerated from a leisurely 18 knots to a combat-ready 30 knots. In Navy speak, that's the maritime equivalent of someone suddenly reaching for their gun during a tense conversation. What the Americans didn't know, at least not yet, was that Beijing had just given the Zhangcheng's captain some pretty aggressive orders. Intercept the Americans and make them blink first. Well, Beijing was about to get a very expensive education in why that's never worked out well for anyone. Now, let's talk about what the Chinese were really up against here. The USS Nimitz carrier strike group wasn't just any naval formation. This was 180 nautical miles of pure American naval power floating in international waters. We're talking about the USS Nimitz herself, all 104,600 tons of floating American diplomacy, carrying 90 of the world's most advanced aircraft.
The strike group's mission was textbook freedom of navigation, predictable course, transparent intentions, and the kind of professional conduct that separates real navies from what are essentially floating militias. But professional doesn't mean pushovers, and the Chinese were about to learn that lesson the hard way. Inside the Princeton's Combat Information Center, the tactical action officer watched that Chinese destroyer's approach with the kind of calm that only comes from knowing you've got 122 vertical launch cells loaded with enough firepower to turn any surface ship into an artificial reef. The math was simple but absolutely terrifying for anyone on the receiving end. At the Chinese destroyer's current speed, she'd reach weapons engagement range in exactly 17 minutes. Here's where it gets interesting, and by interesting I mean scary as hell. The Zhangcheng's YJ-18 anti-ship missiles could theoretically cover the remaining distance in under 4 minutes once launched. But here's the kicker. The Princeton's SM-6 missiles in surface mode could reach out about 240 nautical miles and swat those Chinese missiles out of the sky like flies at a barbecue. The captain's response when asked about going to general quarters? Pure American confidence. Let's see how badly they want to embarrass themselves first. By 9:30 a.m., the Princeton's cooperative engagement capability had automatically shared the threat data across every ship in the strike group. This is where American naval technology really starts to shine. When one ship sees something, they all see it. It's like having a hive mind, but with guided missiles. The Nimitz herself adjusted her flight operations with Swiss watch precision. The destroyers Chenghen and Kidd shifted positions to create a protective screen around the carrier that would turn any Chinese attack into a very short, very one-sided fight. Then at 9:35, things went from concerning to downright dangerous. An E-2D Hawkeye, orbiting at 25,000 feet and providing a god's eye view of everything within 400 miles, detected multiple aircraft launching from the Chinese carrier Shandong. The radar signatures were consistent with J-15 fighters, climbing hard and heading south.
Now here's where it gets almost comical. The J-15s were struggling to gain altitude, likely because of the limitations of from that ski jump launch system the Chinese are so proud of. While American carriers use catapults to launch aircraft at full combat weight, the Chinese were launching fighters that were basically flying on fumes before they even reached altitude. But wait, it gets better. The sonar operators detected what they believed was a Type 039 diesel-electric submarine about 80 nautical miles away. The funny part? This thing was making noise like a freight train. Any competent submarine crew would have been mortified, but here were the Chinese conducting what they probably thought was a stealthy approach. The Chinese weren't just being aggressive, they were orchestrating what military tacticians call a multi-domain intimidation campaign. Surface ships from the 1990s, carrier aircraft that couldn't carry full weapons loads, and submarines so loud they might as well have been broadcasting their position on social media. It was textbook bullying, the kind that only works if your target is too weak or too scared to fight back. Unfortunately for Beijing, they just challenged the wrong Navy in the wrong ocean. The U.S. Navy had been perfecting blue water dominance since 1914, and these Chinese forces were about to receive a free lesson in why American naval power remains unmatched.
By 9:37, the USS Nimitz's flight deck erupted into the kind of controlled chaos that only American carriers have truly mastered. FA-18E Super Hornets from VFA-14, the Top Hatters, rocketed off the catapults at 45-second intervals, a ballet of precision that Chinese carriers, dependent on inefficient ski jumps, could only dream of matching. The 1st Division of Super Hornets climbed through 15,000 feet, their AN/APG-79 ASA radars already painting the incoming J-15s at maximum range. The technological mismatch was almost unfair. The APG-79's 1,000-plus transmit-receive modules could track dozens of targets simultaneously, while the J-15's mechanically scanned radar swept back and forth like a lighthouse, basically broadcasting its position to anyone listening. The EA-18G Growlers entered the fight without firing a single shot, and that's exactly what made them terrifying. These electronic warfare variants carried ALQ-99 jamming pods that could fry enemy electronics from 100 miles away. As they established their jamming orbits, Chinese communications began to fragment like a bad cell phone connection. On Chinese radar screens, ghost contacts multiplied like a virus. American fighters appeared and disappeared, multiplied and merged. What looked like 4 F-18s became 12, then 20. Radar locks broke and reformed constantly. The J-15 pilots found themselves fighting phantoms when real threats maneuvered unseen.
The Americans executed what's called the Wall, a defensive formation perfected over decades of naval aviation. High cap at 35,000 feet, medium at 25,000, and low at 15,000. Multiple overlapping engagement zones, mutual support, and absolutely nowhere for the Chinese to go without entering someone's weapons envelope. Meanwhile, the Chinese formation remained bunched together, a necessity when your data links can't support distributed operations. They had to maintain visual contact to coordinate, making them predictable and vulnerable. Their J-15s might look impressive on propaganda posters, but in actual combat, they were flying antiques against 21st century warfare. At 9:47 hours, the Jianchong crossed a line that would have triggered immediate retaliation from any other navy. Her Type 346A phased array radar stopped searching and locked onto the USS Nimitz with fire control quality tracking. In naval warfare, this is one breath away from launching missiles, the electromagnetic equivalent of pointing a loaded gun at someone's head. Inside Princeton's Combat Information Center, the response was immediate but measured. American discipline, drilled through countless exercises, held firm. The Chinese were betting American restraint against their aggression. They were about to learn that restraint doesn't mean inability. The Princeton's own fire control radars remained in standby, but her 1,222 vertical launch cells contained enough firepower to send the Jianchong to the bottom in seconds. Every firing solution was continuously updated. The Chinese destroyer was at risk from multiple systems, from multiple angles, with zero chance of survival if this escalated.
The Chinese escalation reached its peak when their submarine made what would prove to be a critical error. At 9:51, it raised its snorkel to recharge batteries, and that's when the Princeton sonar operators had their gotcha moment. Sonar, subsurface contact, bearing 159, range 15,000 yards. Contact is snorkeling, classified as probable type 039. He's making noise like a freight train. The submarine captain either didn't know or didn't care that the Princeton's SQS-53 sonar suite had been tracking him for the past hour. They had his acoustic signature cataloged, his position fixed to within meters. If this went hot, he'd have about 12 seconds to contemplate his life choices before an ass rock turned his boat into fish food. At 2:30 p.m., the USS Nimitz decided it was time to end this little game. She launched everything that could fly. 48 aircraft roared off her deck in the largest single-carrier display of air power in years. Super Hornets loaded with live weapons, EA-18G Growlers carrying electronic warfare packages that could black out a city, and E-2D Hawkeyes commanding the electronic. The afternoon sky turned dark with American aircraft, and that's when a Virginia-class attack submarine decided to make her grand entrance. This boat had been shadowing the Chinese formation for 8 days, silent, invisible, patient. At 3:47 p.m., she surfaced 6 nautical miles from the Shandong, close enough for Chinese lookouts to see her with their naked eyes. The psychological impact was devastating. 8 days of undetected operations meant their entire anti-submarine screen, helicopters, sonobuoys, hull-mounted sonar had failed completely. If this had been war, their carrier would already be on the bottom.
By 4:23 p.m., the Shandong's carrier strike group began what they diplomatically called completing scheduled exercises. Everyone knew the truth. They'd come to demonstrate Chinese naval power, to intimidate lawful navigation, to claim waters that didn't belong to them. Instead, they'd received a graduate-level course in why the South China Sea might as well be America's 6th Great Lake. The lesson was clear, expensive, and hopefully not soon forgotten. When you challenge the U.S. Navy in open water, you better bring more than 1990s technology and hope. Beijing learned that day why American naval dominance isn't just about having bigger ships or more advanced weapons, though we certainly have both. It's about 7 decades of operational excellence, technological superiority, and the kind of professional competence that turns potential conflicts into teaching moments. The Chinese went home that day with their ships intact and their pride significantly damaged. The Americans? They just went back to keeping the world's sea lanes open for business, one freedom of navigation patrol at a time.